So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Dee Gallo, who's going to introduce our speaker for this morning's plenary session. Thank you.
I always have to come after Kathy, and she's so tall. Good morning. Dee Gallo, and for about the next 24 hours, I'm the president, and then I'm not. I always seem to get the presidency the years of the Triennial, so this is my second time on this rodeo. But anyway, it's a good meeting, and I have to say, I was so pumped and enthusiastic after Sister Ray Marie's talk last night. She just, I think, and probably because I'm involved in Custodia, which is the consultation that ACWR has set up, so we get to speak to congregations and communities that are merging or closing down, and it always seems like it's an issue that's kind of grim and with problems, but she put quite a different light on it by saying, and I thought of one story in some of the archive stories that I have come across while I did Custodia site visits. There were sisters who were left completely sponsorless. They had no money. There were sisters on the prairie who were forced to eat grass because that was the only thing that they had to survive. And you think that our problem now is, well, we have our materials somewhere stored. We just have to sort that out. It seems like a minor issue in comparison to how are we going to survive tomorrow. So I think I want to share with you something that's a family saying in our household. When things get tough, we always say, we can do this. And I think that's going to be my motto for sharing this conference with you. We can do this. And we're looking at it at a good time, and we have excellent speakers. Monte Abbott is going to tell you about something that he shared with me at a conference at Catholic University. We actually wound up at the same table, and we were having lunch, and I was talking to him about some of the custodial things, and he started explaining this proposal project thing to me, and I thought, oh my God, that's exactly an angle we're not taking a look at. So when we were planning plenaries, I thought we need to get Monte. So I'll stop babbling here and introduce him. Monte Abbott began as archivist with the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, province of Mid-North America, in 2014. The job has expanded to oversight of 2 additional provincial archives, the New York province and the Central South province. Monte proposed a merger of the 3 archives in 2017, and the proposal was accepted. Work continues with an expected wrap-up in fall of 2019. Currently, Monte's job title is Director of Operations, and that includes IT on the St. Louis campus, special projects, and other less well-defined tasks. We all know those. Monte hikes, he reads, and works in a small vineyard in his spare time. So I'm pretty interested in hearing about the vineyard, Monte. But thank you very much. So let's welcome Monte.
Thank you, Dee. Good morning, everybody. So good to be here in this beautiful hotel with the quick room service and the cool, dark rooms. The talk last night was a fantastic opening, I thought, and Sister McNamara really touched on some issues that I've been living with lately. Bear with me, it's been 4 years since I lectured, so I'll get into this in a minute. I'm so happy to be here with you fellow archivists, because I know that you're my people. You, like me, like to organize other people's wisdom, and you like to touch other people's old junk. So I say that with the fondest of intentions, because that's exactly who I am. Seriously, though, if you would indulge me, please raise your hand if you are a lay staff partner who is an archivist, so not a sister. Okay, thank you. Please raise your hand if you're a sister who is an archivist. Oh, we might be about half and half. Okay, thank you. Now, please raise your hand if you are a sister who is an archivist who is also in some role in leadership in your religious institute, or you have been in the past. Wow, okay, I didn't expect to see that many. Interesting, good. That makes me very happy. So, I'll give you a couple of disclaimers before I get into everything here. If you're here for a step-by-step guide of how Sisters of the Good Shepherd, secured the long-range future of our archives, you're going to be disappointed. We haven't gotten there yet. Sorry. I'm here to describe one process that I am taking part in and to ask you questions, and I hope some of the questions that we talk about today are of use to you and will be of use to somebody after you return home. The second disclaimer is the observations that I've made in my process and the things I say here today may or may not be useful or even based in your reality. I am an outsider here in a large extent, so as you can see, I'm not a sister, I'm not a female, I'm not even a Catholic. But I feel like I've come home when I'm with the sisters I work with. And the sisters I work with have facilitated a lot of healing in my life. And so I take this very seriously, and it's very meaningful to me. I'm wholeheartedly a mission partner. But I think it's good that I am not a sister and not a Catholic, because I have some outside perspective that I think has prompted me in what I hope turns out to be useful. How many of you, like me, just love books? Of course. Of course. How many of you just tremble if you touch this foundress's letters? How many of you even get to do that, right? We've all got that seminal artifact that was, key in some really critical time in the history of the Institute. So I think we're all collectors at heart. We love books and words and order and quiet, dark, cool rooms. It's just in our nature. But if our archives was a room in a ship, how often do we go above decks? Do we know the state of the hull of that ship? We just stay down below decks. Do we know about the storms that are up there? Do we think God's just going to take care of all of it? It's easy to ignore the broader picture. It's someone else's job. Maybe leadership is taking care of the future for us. If somebody else, or if everything else fails, it's in God's hands. Anyway, I'm a little too busy. We all have our accession stacks, and we have our various tasks that we are busy with, and those are, of course, very important. What I'm suggesting is that strategic thinking and planning and good quality archives work require different skill sets sometimes. And they require us to engage different interpretive lenses when we're looking at the thing in front of us. And that's not easy to do. And I've found it very difficult to do good quality archives work at the same time I'm doing this other stuff. It'd be much easier to just stay in the office and process and do research. So why don't we just do that? Well, for me, I have left the archives to some extent. Even though I've taken on oversight of 2 other archives, I'm doing only about 30% of the work in the archives that I was hired to do. Why not let others do the big picture thinking? For me, at least, I come to the archives from a very different place. And my previous career was teaching anthropology and archaeology at the university level, conducting archaeological excavations, analyzing laboratory materials from those excavations, and doing writing and analytical work. So, coupled with that, I grew up building houses with my dad, and then I put myself through college with my own small business. And so I've got quite a few different skill sets, and I'm more used to thinking at the upper organizational level, even though I love to lose myself in that frontline work of organizing, describing, answering research requests. So for me, there's a real split there, and I think a lot of people may not have that same experience of their work. So hopefully this is good, different perspective for you. The first sister I ever met hired me as the archivist. Is that shocking? That's probably pretty weird, isn't it? I had never met a sister before 4 years ago. I probably had. They probably just didn't tell me they were sisters in passing. Okay, so I started the job with a lot of questions. And so I'm going to describe a lot of the questions that I've spent 4 years working on, and then where that leads me to in terms of thinking about how we keep our archives safe. So the past years have been pretty intense. Learning about the history of the Good Shepherd Sisters was the very first thing I needed to do, right? And the first bit of advice was, well, start reading the archives. So if there's anything that generates questions, it's that. Right? You get in there and you start looking in the archives, and you end up with more questions than you did when you went in the door. Learning how to work in the sister's home as a mission partner. Wow, what a mind-blowing experience. You know what I'm talking about. Learning how to exist as a professional employee inside their community dynamic, because as much as they don't want that to happen, it happens. You get involved. Sorting the various threads of Catholic history and political factions that influence their decision-making today. And then moments of insight that come from getting just a little bit of a glimmer of what it means to be in community in this place and time after joining community maybe in the 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s in those places in time. I think we all understand that it's a very complex landscape that we're operating in, even if we don't know the details. So in order to understand the collections I was hired to work with, I knew I had to understand the sisters, at least as far as possible. This is where my anthropology background comes in. Some of you have probably heard of the early 20th century anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski. He came onto the scene at the tail end of the period when Europeans traveled to South America and Asia and Africa, and they lived with the colonizers, the government agents and the administration of colony. And they would sit on the veranda and sip their cocktails, and they would take notes about the little natives and what they were wearing and the stuff they were saying. And maybe they didn't even speak the language. Malinowski realized that if you really want to understand somebody, you have to live with them. You have to get to know them, not as an observer, but as a participant in their life. And, you know, that changes you. That really changes you if you do it, because you start to see your life through their eyes. So during this process, of course, we all have to come down off the veranda at some point and get involved with the sisters. And for me, that has been a bit of a distraction for looking at the big picture thing, because the sisters have a lot of problems and a lot of things they deal with on a day-to-day basis. The risk involved, of course, is always there that you will go native. I hope I'm going native. Early on, I also realized that I needed some additional information relative to managing the archives. If I was to administer archives, I needed to know how much growth was possible. Could I ask and create new programs? Why do we not have an acquisitions policy? How much money can I ask for in the budget? Can we afford more staff? What happens to all this stuff when all of you retire? These questions all came back to me with the same answer: I don't know. And this was from leadership, right? And I don't say that as a criticism. I say that's just a statement of reality. It's kind of a polite version of, we hired you to figure that out. So in order to figure it out, we need more information. And really, the first thing we need to know is the numbers, don't we? How many of you have access to the numbers? Do you know the budget the leadership looks at? I don't get to see that. So fairly on, I began informally interviewing sisters to learn about a number of things. One thing I wanted to know about was the history of their experiences with decision-making and leadership culture. I began to visit the sisters and the sisters' programs in various places around the country during my trips to collect things for archives. And I also began learning about operations in those different locations, so how they carry out the mission, and also began to learn and pursue opportunities to learn about how nonprofits deliver services in the Catholic social service world. Now, I have to say that I've been granted a lot of opportunities to do things I think maybe a lot of archivists don't get, because I asked for them, and because I felt like it was necessary, and because I had really agreeable, wonderful supervisory structure above me. I began locating and visiting former convents as I traveled around in order to document those buildings and in order to just experience in some direct way some of the physical realities that came from those earlier expressions of institute and of religious life. And when I could, I would spend some quiet time in those places. I accepted the invitation to join a ministry advisory board, and so that allowed me to actually participate. So we're getting back to the participant part of observation, right? So I actually began to take part in some of the decision making. And then finally, I accepted another invitation to work on a property team around the relocation of our sisters and sale of property. In that capacity, I've been interacting with a variety of stakeholders, including local politicians, property developers, property consultants, the neighbors, and of course the sisters and leadership team. Other learning for me has been a deep dive into Catholic publications and trying to understand current events around the church and around sisters and institutes in this new frame. Reading LCWR papers and addresses, going to Rickery sessions, and just basically immersing myself in the organizational realities of the institutes today. So I've gathered all kinds of data and tried to hold some of that in my brain. And some of this data may be familiar to you. It may sound familiar from your own experience. So Sisters of the Good Shepherd in the province of Mid-North America currently have about 200 sisters, I believe. We have 7 sponsored ministries. Those are ministry corporations, learning centers, residential treatment facilities, shelters, crisis centers, schools, and human trafficking shelter. The sisters have transitioned out of direct service for the most part, and they retain reserve powers on those nonprofit boards and some fiduciary oversight. The sisters are looking towards a time when they do not have any of those responsibilities to carry. The ministry programs strive to maintain a cultural connection to the sisters and to the charism. And I think for a lot of you, you get that. It's really central to the delivery of services, is that they stay in touch with that divine spark that kind of started everything off. Those stories are really critical to the people on the boards and in the administration and in the delivery of services in those corporations. The sisters try to keep the charism link alive as well through establishing an office that we call Mission Effectiveness. So we have a couple of employees who travel around the country and do presentations at those nonprofit ministry corporations and for those staff to continually infuse them with the sayings of the foundress and with the events of her life and with the sort of the idea of why we're doing this work and also the idea of us as a group doing things together. Okay. So where was I? Data from the field. So for the ministry programs, as I've been traveling around and meeting the CEOs and leadership and talking with staff and sometimes being able to talk with clients or former clients, I've learned quite a few things there as well. The ministry corporations all have a lot of needs. And as the sisters age and look to a time when they are leaving even the level of interaction they have with those now, those needs won't go away. Those needs are still present. Some of those needs, and I'll just list a few, they desire improved board recruitment and board development and board retreats. They need staff trainings for things like de-escalation, domestic violence, mediation, HIPAA compliance. The staff would like to have mentorship programs. The programs need certification. The staff are looking for help with records management, data storage, procurement of cost-effective software or open source software. They would like to have the opportunity to buy software at volume licensing prices. They need negotiations for textbooks at volume prices. Translation services, health insurance assistance. The clients are not tracked long range after they leave the program, and some programs would like to do that. They've expressed a desire for help with audits and financial accounting. Fundraising help, state-level advocacy activities with their state legislature, and a number of other things. The clients would like help with job searches after they graduate from the programs. They desire, sometimes and often, a continued connection with Good Shepherd, maybe with the program or with the sisters, and they have voiced a desire for spiritual support. Oh, that's not what the missions are providing on the face, but it's interesting that that came up. Staff and employees at our ministry programs, they're looking for a broadening of the Good Shepherd experience. They would like to have more connections between the different programs in the different cities. They really value the rare opportunities to meet staff members in other cities. And so staff swaps, staff retreats, more of that mission effectiveness. There's always a desire for more. There's never, no one ever says I want less. They would like to have access to the archives. They want to know what's in there. Staff spirituality opportunities. Potential for connections with Good Shepherd sisters and programs in other countries. Global connections. Mentorship programs. And support beyond their 9-to-5 jobs. Our staff, of course, face the same problems everybody else in the country does. Aging parents or new parents. And they've expressed desire for all kinds of things. Our province administration has a whole other bucket of issues they deal with. And administration, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have other departments and other nonprofits, such as the National Advocacy Center in Silver Springs, Maryland. That is our national lobbying office. And the staff there are interested in developing their social media outreach. And they work really hard on that. But it's one of the things that they said they could use help with. They would like to have a newsletter targeted at all of the Good Shepherd family across the country. And that's something we don't currently have. They want help with national fundraising. And they would like to be able to push their advocacy efforts not just to the national government in D.C., but maybe out to the state level governments in the states where we have operations and ministry corporations. Now for the sisters themselves, we know the sisters need lots of different things. And in this learning process for me, those needs really became apparent as well. This is going to sound very familiar to all of you. Retirement care, health care, good quality health and retirement care. Ministry opportunities for sisters who are retired or near retired that are consistent with what they desire and value and with their health and abilities. Basically, that means not being put out to pasture. That's my thinking. We provide English training for Sisters of the Good Shepherd from other countries in our Province Center in St. Louis. We're located right next to the University of Missouri that provides English as a second language training and certification. And so after the sisters retire, that global need for the generalate will continue. And, of course, along with that goes coordination of visas for sisters from many provinces. Sister visits and mission swaps that may continue to be attractive to sisters in other countries and provinces, even after all of our sisters are retired. And then links between the North American Good Shepherd world and the Central America and South American Good Shepherd world. Right now, they're practically totally distinct. We never hear anything about them. I'm sure that leadership hears about them and the sisters hear about them in some way, but the ministry programs are quite disconnected from our neighbors to the south. Okay, now I'm all the way back to the needs of the archive, and this is going to be familiar for you as well. We need a forever home for our archives. We need secure funding for that home. Our archives has to become relevant to people in the future. Well, isn't it? That's the question I hear coming back, right? Isn't it relevant? It might be, but we don't let anybody in there, so there's no way for them to know. But also relevant in the future of Good Shepherd. This story about diminishment is just one story, isn't it? And we don't know what the future brings for Good Shepherd. There's Good Shepherd around the world in other places. And we don't know how the Spirit's going to move in the future. We have a need for scholarship and publication, and we have nothing happening on that front currently. We need a robust acquisitions program that goes beyond one person traveling around the country and asking people for donations of old papers. I'm sorry, I need my glasses. My handwriting just got a lot smaller. Sometimes during this process of learning, I visited our archives in Ohio and in Queens, New York, and began to assist with maintenance of their collections because they didn't have any staff. Each of those places had one sister who had many other duties and sometimes would go into the archives room and answer a request that had come in over the phone or email. And right away, I began to see that what we have in St. Louis is exactly what we have in New York and Ohio. And of course, that made me think, well, do other sisters have the same set of issues? So the bigger picture needs for us across the 3 provinces of North America are to streamline expenses, open all the collections to access by archivists to some extent. Because right now they're not closed, but they're practically closed because we have such low staffing. Address preservation concerns in these different places. Stabilize the conditions of preservation and environment in those collections. And then other baseline activities such as conducting inventories, figuring out what's on the finding aids that's missing, and trying to maybe find some of that stuff. And then putting in place a plan to catch up with accessioning. That was, yeah. We laugh because it hurts, right? So all of these needs are present in an environment of aging sisters, increasing demands on the time and resources of those sisters in leadership, and in the environment of a diminishing pool of individuals who are able and willing to take leadership responsibility in our institutes. And you know, when you don't get a day off, even firemen get a day off, right? And I know the Sisters of the Good Shepherd leadership team members, to me it seems they're constantly putting out fires and they don't take days off. This brings me to the question of completion in the title of my talk. And of course the title of my talk, I'll just reiterate, is Strategic Planning for Archives in a Time of Completion. And if any of you see a Good Shepherd sister, please don't tell her I said the Good Shepherd sisters are in completion, because they're not. I'm referring very broadly to this ethos we're living in right now, when so many orders are in completion or are looking towards a time when they need to start addressing the issues of completion. We're very much in that looking forward position. but we're also very much still active. All across the country, you know that religious life is infused with an awareness that we're in a shift of era. And I think this comes with a lot of emotional weight for sisters and for sisters in leadership. And I think a lot of us mission partners feel that. We know that that's the realm we're working in. It calls up questions of obsolescence, doesn't it? Questions about the future, questions about death. Is the church ending? On an individual level, is this the end of my life's work? What does this mean for legacy? Even if we don't put those into words, even if those things are unspoken, I think the emotional weight of that continues to be present, and it can block our planning. So dealing with that, even us mission partners, it's not outside of our wheelhouse. I think we do need to think about that. We need to be aware of those issues. Because leadership may be the ones who have the responsibility to set our budgets and determine the future, but they're busy with other stuff. They need us. Okay, what about Catholic and Sisters archives in general? The questions I've begun asking on that level when I meet with other archivists from other institutes is, do you have perpetual funding for your archives? And what I was thinking when I started asking that question was, surely somewhere in the funding structure of your order, your institute, somebody set aside a financial instrument or an investment and said, well, our archives is forever, so this is where we'll fund that from. Raise your hand if you know that to be true. I have not yet met one person who says that's true. I've met a lot of people who said they didn't know, but I suspect it's not true as well. So, I mean, it's not true that they have it. The startling thing for me was that so many archivists who put forward budgets every year don't know where the money's coming from. That's business, that's normal business for us. That was a big learning for me. Well, why don't we know that? And what I've decided is because it's not our business. Because whether it should be or shouldn't be our business, I believe the pattern I'm recognizing is that most institutes operate in the same way relative to this. That the funding of everything is a black box for sisters who aren't in leadership and for lay staff. That's just the way the business is operated. Along with saying it's not my decision, some people, actually quite a few, have said some variation of, well, the budget is approved every year. Sort of suggesting that the budget is always going to be approved every year. I begin to ask, do you have a plan for the next 50 years for your archives? No. Do you have a plan for the next 20 years? No. Do you have a plan? Well, we're thinking about it. Is leadership thinking about it with you? And a lot of people have said, yes, we're involved in this. But I think, and I think it's getting better. I think in these meetings that we're having, I'm seeing a lot more thinking along the really long-term lines. My hypotheses or conclusions from this data that I've been collecting are about really where we are in this world of religious archives. And with respect to the future and what the function of the functioning of the religious archives means for the future of the archives. I believe leadership may underestimate the need for attention to the archives still, and to the archives' future. And if we think about it from a perspective of a group of sisters who are constantly putting out fires, perhaps the archives is one of those things that feels a little squared away. And I'm drawing in broad strokes here. The archives generally are a room or a collection of rooms that's kind of a little bit away from everything else. It's ordered. We have competent staff. We have a very predictable budget that does get approved every year. It's not quite signed and sealed, but it's probably not in crisis in the same way that health care or a foundering ministry corporation might be. Now, archivists, we know our archives are a mess, but we're not telling the sisters in leadership, are we? We know there's a pile of unaccessioned things, and we would really like to get in there and change all the labels. But from leadership perspective, we're okay. Strategic planning at the very top may not be capturing or really engaging with possibilities for the best role of the archives for the future, and I mean the long-term future. Sister McNamara's talk last night, she really touched on the fact that the stories in our archives are the wellspring of sort of our joy in our work, and they really are. It's those stories that contain the heart of the charism. If all the sisters are gone someday, where's the charism going to be going? We're going to have to make an avenue for that to come out of these archives into the world. And right now, I'm not sure we really have that. I know the Good Shepherd Archives doesn't have that. Because some part of the charism is in there, in those dusty old papers. Because when I get in there and I read those stories, my heart breaks open sometimes. And this happens, I know it happens to you. The spirit's not going to die when the sisters die. It's not. Those aren't just dusty papers. And so we really have to think about these things strategically. We have to ask that question, how do we move this archives into some of the role that our leadership teams are playing? Is it possible? I think it is. How can we open all of that up to the world? I know you don't have the time to do that or think about that, and you're probably not even interested in it because it's such a different type of work from archives work. But what if you could find ways to think about it while you're at work? Who is it that has the knowledge of how powerful those stories are? Well, it's you. It really is. And if leadership doesn't know that, then they'll never make the connection. And so really what I'm encouraging you to do, sort of my hypothesis here, is that even if you can't get out of your archives and do strategic planning, long-term thinking, and envisioning, you still probably have opportunities to engage with sisters in leadership. And you have time to sit and think and pray about how this can unroll for you just a little bit. Do you think of yourself as an agent of the Spirit? And I mean this in relation to your archives work. I didn't when I first started working there, but I do now. Do we just look to the sisters as the vessels of that? And I think I see that a lot in different parts of the Good Shepherd organizations I contact. When the sisters are all gone, as I just said before, what happens to that spirit? We know it's not gone. So let's get comfortable with channeling it now. Sister archivists, are you leadership people? Or are you just archives people? And we've got a good showing of some of you are both. I do think that some of the sisters who I know are archives people, but not leadership people. And it's really encouraging to see that a lot of us have some pieces of both skill sets. I'm encouraging us all to look for ways to reach across those boundaries. And I think leadership needs us to do that. There are, of course, huge concerns about boundaries. Who has a right to be in this place? Who has a right to ask a question? So I would just say, use your instinct there. But remember, the leadership team is consumed with forest fires, and they may not be able to reach to us. Maybe we can reach to them a little bit. My emerging vision for Good Shepherd Archives is, of course, changing. I began with a vision of just merging the three archives in order to cut costs and to open the collections and to standardize the things like environment and preservation. And in order to just learn more about all three provinces. I expanded that and began to think about how we could connect with our Mission Effectiveness Office to infuse the programs and the staffs with some of these stories. Now, that's still a work in progress. The Mission Effectiveness Office has their hands full as well. And so I reach out to them from time to time, and that's continuing. Could we connect with our communications department? What a no-brainer. Have we done it? We're not really effective yet. We keep working at it. Could we connect with our advocacy center? Why would we do that? Well, those stories generate energy for us. Maybe they would be meaningful to the legislators as well. So we continue to work on that. I believe there's also a possibility for us to link our archives back to the Generalate in Rome. If you don't know what a generalate is kind of, I won't explain this like a sister would, but it's sort of the home office for Good Shepherd. It was originally in France, where our foundress lived, but it's now in Rome. And the reason I'm thinking of that is in order to connect with our other provinces around the world. The most direct connection is through the Generalate, as far as I know. So, as I've traveled around and learned and talked to people, what I've been doing is intruding on people's boundaries. It's been well received for the most part. And I'm going to encourage you in your spare time to do that as well, to try to, if not break down walls, at least look for, places to put in some temporary windows. How are we on time? We're fine? Okay. I'm almost at the end. About a year and a half ago, I started building a plan for a proposal for an institute, sort of a separate standalone organization that would hold the archives and would take on some of the additional functions of that the sisters provide now to the ministry corporations, and that could connect those corporations and those ministries in some ways that they aren't currently connected and fill some of their needs. So the idea was a new nonprofit that connects the system in a way it's not connected. One of the other things that I learned was that after Vatican II, the Good Shepherd Sisters really transformed their North American operations from a vertical organization to a very horizontal organization. So local communities control almost everything, and there's not a real emphasis on connection across communities. And I think maybe sometimes connection gets done in spite of the organizational structure. But as the sisters age, maybe we're seeing a need for something that's a little more vertical in order to connect and meet needs in more standard ways. So some of the things that I listed that the ministries need, their support for their boards, trainings, those kind of things are probably better done locally, but I was surprised to find that, they really don't have time or resources in some of the cities they're in. So it might be good to have some kind of a national professional association that would do that. Well, how do you tie that to archives? How do you tie that with mission effectiveness? That's something that I really struggled with, and as I talk with our CEOs, some of our CEOs are separately working on what comes next in terms of dealing with the legal framework when sisters want to transfer those reserve powers. What's the container they put those reserve powers in when they all retire? And so we're continuing to work on that, and I continue to have those discussions. One of the possibilities that I've seen lately sort of takes us out of the realm of Good Shepherd, I'll say not out of, but beyond just Good Shepherd. And so it's the idea of seeing the archives as the nucleus for a cultural institution. Because the stories are so important to the operation of the missions, because they're so important in the lives of the staff. I believe that that is a connection that can be realized. The cultural institution that I have in mind is really focused on research and dissemination of information. And that allows us to link our mission effectiveness and our advocacy and the staff. And if we have a connection to the generalate, then we can link people back into the Good Shepherd, actual Good Shepherd network of sisters who are in the global south and in Rome, even after all the sisters in Europe and North America have retired. It's pie in the sky, I know. So currently, we're working with a group of CEOs. We're looking at legal structures. I'm not sure we're really getting to the heart of how we keep the stories alive, and that's something I continue to push in the meetings. So I promised you at the beginning of the talk that I wouldn't have any answers, and that's right where we are. We have no answers. I hope that there's some way and that some of you can begin to ask questions of your leadership, because I think it's in the asking of the questions that we have power and that we have momentum. When I was first asked to think about talking about this publicly, the image that I had in my mind was the old Facebook meme from a few years ago that was the Library of Alexandria in flames. And the meme was, "I still get angry when I think about the Library of Alexandria." Well, I mean, we know that it wasn't one library and it wasn't one fire, but that doesn't matter. If we think about our collections 100 years from now, it really makes me think about the Library of Alexandria, right? Do you know where your collection is going to be in 100 years? We don't know. Is your institute going to be operating? Some of you will, some of you won't. I think we can say for certain many fewer religious institutes will be operating. And some of those will be institutes that don't even exist now, that will come into being. What's going to happen to the archives for the institutes that close? Well, we know they're going to be handed off or discarded. I think some of them will be discarded. And some of those receiving institutions are going to deaccession them. So it's, yes, so the image in my head at the time was we're going to go through a winnowing of this information. And what does that mean for the big picture? Well, it means that the stories that people know about religious life in the 19th and 20th century, this big movement, that knowledge is going to be vastly different than it is now. Right now, people just don't know much about it. I'm saying people out in the general world. I think it will still be unknown, but what's known about it will be radically different because only a section of the information will be preserved. The public image of the church and religion in general is going to be different, and we don't know what that's going to be like. My family is Protestant. Actually, my father was a Pentecostal preacher, and I know that my family members came from Kentucky and Virginia during the Great Awakening. And I'm sure they participated in that. But I had to go to high school history class to learn about the Great Awakening. So it's just crucial that we really think strategically, because thinking strategically is going to help some of our collections survive better. What remains in 100 years or 200 years is going to be what informs scholars. And it's going to be what carries the spirit of this into the future. I think a new century calls for a new openness from ourselves. It calls for us to go out beyond our regular work when we can and think in these other levels. Ilia DeLeo, writing for Global Sisters Report, recently discussed the new religious stances of millennials. She says they think differently about God, they think differently about themselves, they think differently about boundaries and reality. It seems to me like whatever the Spirit is revealing is already in progress. And I'm going to continue to strive to be the change that's coming and think big, because you're a big deal. Thank you.